Hey guys, what's going on? It's Dave from Evil Eye Games. Today I'm going to do a video that I've kind of wanted to do for a while now, and I want to cover some common questions and some of the concepts behind the third-person cover shooter. So I thought I'd throw this video together and go ahead and give you an idea of what's going on, why some things are the way they are, and why I answer some questions the way I do. So first off, I get the question a lot, why haven't you added a certain feature or a certain asset to the game yet? And the primary reason is because it's not a priority. When putting together a game, you have to make a list of priorities of everything that you want to add, and you have to follow that list of priorities. A lot of people get sidetracked into adding different things or adding different features to their game way too early, and it ends up derailing the project. When you come out with a project idea and how you want to incorporate it, you have to identify a certain set of core features that function within the game. And when I'm talking about core features, I'm talking very, very core features. Usually the first thing you're going to decide is what kind of game is it, and we're talking very broad here. Is it going to be a first-person shooter? Is it going to be a platformer? Is it going to be a point-and-click adventure? And then you have to figure out what about those games makes those games fun? What about those games is going to be the primary driver of that game? For example, I'm going to use the Steam Marketplace because it's ridiculous as a core example. But if you swim around there on the Greenlight project, you're going to see a lot of really bad examples of game prioritization and game design from people who are making games but not really focusing on the actual making of a game. One of the things that you're going to find that is definitely oversaturated the market in the Steam Greenlight page is things like survival horror something or other. And the game, you run around and there are zombies because zombies are easy to program. And then you have like a hunger and thirst system, and you have a crafting system, and you have this wide expansive map, but there's nothing in the map. These are great examples of really poorly designed games. Because when you get to the core of it, the gameplay itself is terrible. And it doesn't matter what features you add to the game. If the base core of your game is terrible, everything else is going to be terrible. So you can have a crafting system, you can have a thirst hunger system, you can have all these amazing features that are in there, but if the base experience that the player is getting is garbage, everything else is going to be garbage. Another thing I get asked frequently is, how do I do this completely unrelated task? Or, here's a game, and how do I do something like they did in that game? That's not the focus of this series. I am really not very concerned with anything that doesn't directly apply to the gameplay, to be quite honest. And it takes me a lot of time to make these videos. We're talking about an excess of 5 times what it would take me to actually do something, because I have to end up doing what I'm planning on doing, testing it out, and then I have to go ahead and basically backtrack and redo the whole thing while recording it, and then I have to go through editing the video, and I do edit portions of the video out because there are a lot of times in the video where I will do a lot of ums and ahs. I will get up and I'll walk away for a couple minutes. I'll have brain farts and just completely lose what I'm saying. So I do chop up the video, and probably there's like an extra 30% to the videos that you don't see where I'm doing these things. So I cut those parts out for convenience and to make the videos shorter than they are, because a lot of them are turning out to be longer than I thought they would be. After that, I have to go into all these other tasks where I end up rendering the video and then uploading the video to YouTube, and then waiting for it to process and then actually publishing it once it's finished. So the time frame for me making a video, you can probably assume that I've spent at least 5 times as much time making that video and publishing it than the actual time of the video. And I don't mind taking the time out to do all these videos, but I have to have a primary focus on what I'm trying to accomplish with my videos, and going out of my way to do things that are unrelated to this video series is just going to end up delaying other videos. I'm certainly up for helping other people troubleshoot issues when they arise in the game, so I will definitely try when I see things in the comment sections and they're having problems with something that they're trying to do. I will absolutely go ahead and try my best to figure out what went wrong and where the problem lies. But as far as doing something that is unrelated to what I'm doing, this is something I'm doing in my spare time. I have a full-time job. I'm married. I can't just go out of there and start making all these other crazy tutorials because it's going to sidetrack this series. And this is something I want to go ahead and get done. Another question I get asked a lot is why root motion and what is root motion? I briefly skimmed over it in the initial video. As for why root motion, to be quite honest, it was something I just wanted to experiment with. I never used any root motion in any games prior to this other than specific animations. And I want to try something like building a root motion controller and seeing how that actually worked in a game world. Now that I've done it, I'm kind of a little bit regretting having done the root motion controller, but at the same time, it's nothing that's breaking the game, and it would be significantly more work to go back and recreate everything without root motion. And of course, what is root motion? I mean, there's documentation that exists in Unreal where they kind of describe it, but we have the player capsule, and when an animation is played, the mesh plays the actual animation. Now, if you have movement animations, like say a dive out of the way, what can happen is when you make that dive and the animation plays, the character can leave the capsule. What root motion does is it takes the capsule with the animation. So the root of the character is moved along with the animation. That's why we're not using the standard controller type that is found in, for example, Unreal Engine's examples. So it's useful for preventing movement out of bounds or having an animation play through a wall. But at the same time, there are some downsides to the animation. But it is something I'm kind of dealing with as we go along with the game. And of course, I do get asked, what are my end goals with this project? I started this project because I'm a hobbyist, and I liked playing around with Unreal Engine. And I wanted to take a project from very beginning to very end. So from starting with nothing and creating a deployable project that other people could play. And I started making a game that turned into this third-person cover shooter series. And I found that I kept getting sidetracked and sidelined on what I was doing. And I would get to certain points and I would kind of miss the motivation to keep chugging on the project. So I ended up deciding to make it in a video series, so that way it would kind of force me on a sort of timeline to make videos, and it would force me to address issues and continue on with the project. And as an added benefit there, I could share this information and share the whole process with other people, and hopefully they can learn from it. And what am I going to do with the game when we get to the end? I probably going to end up releasing it on itch.io or one of the other game sites, and I'll most likely make it free. I'm not going to really charge for it. This is more of a hobby thing and something I want to do rather than I want to make money off of this. So one of the other things I want to address is the priorities with making this project, because I feel a lot of questions derive from, what my priorities are when I make this. And simply put, the topmost priority has to be a game that runs, which should be automatic, but I want to put that in there to drive it home, as I want something that runs. Next, I want to make a game that's at least somewhat entertaining to play. Obviously, if people don't enjoy playing the game, then it's pretty much a waste of space. and it's just something that's going to get out there. People are going to pick it up and they're going to drop it, and that'll be the end of it. The next thing in my priority list is solid core mechanics. And this is super important to making any video game. I've already kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I want to drive this point home. This is super important. Having solid core mechanics is what is going to make or break your game. It doesn't matter what your game looks like. It doesn't matter how many added features you have. If the core mechanics of your game are faulty, the whole game is going to essentially be garbage. The next item on the priority list is visual aesthetic. And I want to make perfectly clear that it's aesthetic and not visual quality. When we're talking about visual aesthetics, we're talking about having things that look like they exist in the same world. Now, a lot of people, myself included, when they first get started into these projects, end up focusing on looks over substance. And function always trumps form. If you look at the indie market that is out there, a lot of games that are receiving a ton of praise don't have AAA grade visuals. And of course, there's the argument that it's not coming out of a AAA studio, so they don't have all the resources that a AAA studio has. But at the same time, they make very visually appealing games. If you're looking at games that are super popular in the indie market, I mean, there's stuff like Hotline Miami, Broforce, games like Undertale or Her Story. And they aren't the most graphically astonishing games in the world. But what drives these games is the core play mechanic and the fact that there is a certain visual aesthetic that links everything together. There are a lot of people who go on the marketplace and buy up a whole bunch of asset packs and just kind of jam all these different things together. And if you look at it from an outside perspective, it really looks like a lot of these things don't belong together. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about aesthetic, is we want everything to mesh up and we want it to look like everything came from the same universe and is depicted in the same way. And then the last thing is added features. This is just things that are going to go ahead and add to the experience of the game, but aren't necessary to the core play of the game. And then I want to talk about the timeline for our shooter and timelines in general when making a game. So the very first thing you want to do when making a timeline is making a prototype. And right now, that's the stage at which the third-person cover shooter series is at. I'm working on making a playable prototype that somebody can play. And making a prototype is all about the core experience, the mechanics, and how everything functions. Aesthetics should be the absolutely last thing on anyone's mind. Visual art should be the last thing on anybody's mind. You're making a prototype to basically carve out the very, very base of what the game is and what the game needs to run. At this point, the game doesn't need any different characters, it doesn't need to equip any different weapons, it doesn't need to have all these crazy features like night vision or an inventory or anything else, because none of this is mandatory to make the game playable, to create the very framework for which the game needs to run. So when making a prototype, it honestly should look like crap. When looking at the environment and everything else, you're going to have a lot of in-place assets and blocked out areas. Nothing is going to really look like a final product, and it really doesn't matter if it looks like a final product. That's not the point of making a prototype. And once we get to the end of making a prototype, that's when the really, really hard part for a lot of people begins, and that's testing. And by testing, I don't mean just play through it a couple of times and run around like crazy. I mean, give it to other people. Have them play it. Put it up somewhere so that people can download it and test it and get feedback. And the hard part about this is that people are going to say bad things about your game. And you have to be able to accept what they're saying and try and figure out why they're saying it. If you blow off all of the negative reactions to your game, you are doing your game no service whatsoever. More importantly is you have to be able to discern why people are saying what they're saying. Like, obviously, very early on, you're going to be able to get feedback like the game isn't visually appealing or something like that, and that doesn't really matter. But if somebody's saying it's hard to move, they don't like the control scheme, they don't like the way the AI does things, they don't like the way the layout of the map is, they're unclear on what they have to do, they're unclear on the controls and how they function, absolutely, that is stuff you have to take in. And no matter how bad they say it, that is something you definitely have to take into consideration. Pretty much any feedback that you receive, you should never, ever, ever just throw it out the window, and you should never, ever, ever try to make excuses for their feedback and place the blame on them. You're the one creating the game. You're the one responsible for their experience. They're just reporting to you the experience that they have. So it's your job as the game developer to figure out why they're having that experience, why they're not enjoying it, and how to correct that. And then, of course, while testing is going on, you're going to want to begin optimizing the game, probably converting things over to C++. Now, normally in a larger studio environment, even something like a small indie studio, you're going to have programmers on hand that are going to go ahead and continually be converting things over to things like C++ and Unreal Engine 4. And I think it's C# in the Unity environment, if I remember correctly. So during studio type productions, you're going to have somebody on hand that is going to be doing this, and it would be a continuing process throughout the development of the game. And then, of course, you want to begin correcting issues found at testing. So all that feedback that you took in, you're going to have to filter through it and find out what's going on. And then at that point, we want to begin adding visual elements to the game to start making it look more like an actual game product. And at this point, we would also start adding ancillary features to try and incorporate them into the game. And one side note I want to make about when you test the game is that you, to be perfectly honest, should have no interaction with the tester while they're playing the game. It would be great if everybody who tested the game could go ahead and just record their gameplay, and then you could just watch them. But you shouldn't be standing over their shoulder, answering questions for them. You shouldn't be explaining things to them. The point of the testing is to see what they get out of it and how they figure things out and what you need to address. So if you have to introduce them to the game, if you have to explain how the game works to them, then something's wrong with how you're making the game. So at this point, that would bring us to making an alpha. And the alpha is when you're going to go ahead and get closer to a more finalized product. And of course, at every stage, there's always testing. You want to test, and you want to collect all that data from all the players, see what they're saying about it, to see how they're reacting to the game, and to see what they like and what they dislike. And most importantly, you want to see what elements they find enjoyable. And you want to obviously make an effort to emphasize whatever the players find enjoyable and minimize whatever they don't. And of course, we continue the game optimization in the background, and we would continue to correct any issues that are encountered at the different levels. And of course, this would lead up to making a beta. And as always, test, put it out there, have people play it, find out what they're saying, find out what they like and what they dislike, and identify any issues. So in the background of this, we continue to correct the issues as we came across them. We continue to optimize our project, so porting more stuff over to C++, sifting through the different pieces of code that we have to try and identify redundancies or identify things that we're doing that are unnecessary, removing them, or simplifying them. And of course, we would make a final polish pass on our project to lead up to actually releasing the product. And finally, I want to leave off with some tips. If you're newer to game development, if you're just getting into game development, or you want to go ahead and get into game development as a profession, first of all, number one principle, KISS. If you're not American, I don't know if you know this phrase, but the phrase is keep it simple, stupid. And basically, no, I'm not trying to make fun of you, but you want to start out with the most base of concepts and build off of that. So your very first concept for a game is not going to be, I want to make a game where X character is a space pirate and he gets to a space station and he does some stuff and then these things happen and then he has this really cool gun and he goes off and does this. No, we want to start out with a simple concept. So we pick a game genre. So first-person shooter, platformer, a point-and-click, whatever kind of game you want to make. The very basic that you can do. And then you want to go ahead and make that playable. And you want to work your way up from there. If you start off with adding all these features, you're going to go ahead and get drowned in these features. You're going to make features that are not going to be in any way, shape, or form adding anything to the game. And basically, it ruins a lot of people on making games. They'll get in and they'll get started because they want to remake that AAA game that they saw, and a couple months in, they'll quit because they can't figure everything out. So you definitely want to start out with a very basic framework, and you want to build out from your framework. The second thing is to be flexible. So with anything you do in making a game, you want to be flexible on how you do it. And this runs a little bit into taking feedback from players as well, because you might add something to the game, players might not like it. Or you might find that players think it detracts from the game. And you want to be open to that because your core goal is to make a fun and engaging experience for other people. A lot of people will get stuck on making the game for them, block out what everybody else says, and just says anybody who dissents is a hater. And at the end of the day, they're going to make a really crappy product. So as you go through the development process, you have to be willing to add and take away things. You're going to have to deal with limited resources that you have available to you, whether it's time or money or actual assets to use in the game. So as you move along, you're going to have to discard things and possibly add other things in order to make the game the best it can be. Next, you want to focus on understanding how and why things work the way they do within the game engine. It's more important to take away when you're early starting out how and why things function, because that's something that you can carry over to other games. And one of the biggest tips I can give for anybody starting out, and once you've taken the Unreal Engine and you want to dive into it, is Unreal has a bunch of tutorials on their wiki as well as their YouTube site. Go through them. Go through every single one of them. After I kind of got into it for a little while and I was starting to get discouraged, I found the tutorials over on the Unreal Engine site and I started using those. And you not only want to make things that are appropriate to what your end goals are, but you want to do everything you possibly can. And I would recommend going through and trying to make a little bit of every type of game out there. And it can be something simple, it can be something short, even if it's a platformer with only one level. You want to at least have the experience of making all these different types of games, because there's going to be a lot of different concepts, and these concepts can carry over to any number of games. And more than anything, having an eclectic background is going to go ahead and help you so that when you do get to a problem in a game, you're going to have a wealth of knowledge backed up of how you did something before. And of course, don't be afraid to experiment with different things. I've definitely learned a lot from different tutorials, but beyond that, coming from understanding how and why things work, you can then use that to tweak different things and make things work differently for you. And doing this can create new and different ways on doing things, or things that look different, or things that play different, and you can test them out and see how it stacks up against the way other people are doing it. One of the biggest things, and obviously I've pushed this already, but mechanics is king when it comes to making a game. If you're making a game, whether it be in a single person doing it as a hobby, whether in a small studio or whether you're a major AAA company making a game, mechanics is king. If actually playing the game isn't fun, it doesn't matter how good the game looks. So the primary core focus at all times should definitely be on mechanics. You can save the flash for later, you can save the pretty graphics for later, but when you're first starting out and as you're developing the game, you want to remain with your focus on the mechanics of how the game is actually playing. Because once again, if the mechanics are crap, the entire game is going to be crap, regardless of how pretty it looks or how many added features you have. And then another note, kind of riffing off of that, appearance isn't always important as you think, and at least not in the way you think it is. Like, everybody sees the AAA games, and they look at how amazing they look, and they're like, ooh, I want to do that. But AAA games with super pretty graphics that have terrible mechanics aren't fun to play, and people don't stay and play them. More important than having the best look possible is having a coherent look. So you want a look that everything in the environment fits where it's supposed to be. So if you have an environment that's all cartoon-based, and then you throw in some super realistic props in there, it's not going to go ahead and look like it's in place. It's going to throw the player out of the experience of playing the game. So aesthetic is always going to trump the visual quality. You want something that looks good when it's paired together. And I've already sort of mentioned this before, but be prepared for people to say bad things about your game. They're going to play it, they're going to say really bad things about your game, you're not going to like it. You have to detach from being paired to your game. This is absolutely critical to making a better game. And the importance is trying to understand why these people say these things about your game. Because when people play your game, they're not going to be professional critics. They're not going to be somebody who can specifically identify exactly what it is about the game that makes them feel that way. So you have to kind of play a little bit of a detective and try and understand why they're saying what they're saying. And the last tip I have on here is stay away from multiplayer until you understand how the single player works. Multiplayer makes everything significantly more complex. You're going to take the problems that you have in single player and you're going to multiply them greatly by adding in multiplayer. So if you don't have a solid understanding of how things work at a base level, throwing in multiplayer is just going to make things worse. Now, you're probably going to get to the point where you want to add multiplayer in, or make a multiplayer experience, and that's fine. But unless you have the core foundation of making a single-player game, making a multiplayer game is just going to make it so substantially harder, and it's more than likely going to kill your project faster than anything. So that's going to complete my video for today. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them down below. Also, I'm going to push my Facebook page a little bit here because I find it easier to interact with people over on Facebook rather than it is on YouTube. I just keep finding that there are comments that don't show up in my notifications. And at the end of the week, when I go through my comments, I'll find that there are a bunch of comments that I haven't addressed because they never popped in my notify. Whereas it's easier to address them from the Facebook status because they end up actually notifying my phone. So usually with Facebook, you're ending up getting a faster response time, whereas YouTube, the comment section, I will only get to when I'm actually at my desktop. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.